Your Mountain Wellness. I am so happy to have with us today someone that really plays very well into this month's theme. All month long in May 2023, it's the Mental Health Awareness Month. And so many individuals are struggling with all sorts of things that are affecting their mental health. The number one thing I would say is stress. Stress due to loss, stress due to grief. And in many ways, those things can be interchangeable. In many ways, loss for one person is not exactly a loss for another. The way we grieve is not the same from one person to another. But the bottom line is, if we are not handling stress, then it can lead to a host of illnesses. Now, I am a health and life coach. I deal primarily with individuals who are looking to lose weight, who are looking to reverse their type 2 diabetes. And I'll tell you, stress packs on weight. Stress raises your blood levels, the glucose levels. So we're going to ask, and if you can hear my voice, I've been dealing with a particularly annoying type of stress, and that's having a cold, and it's affecting my speaking ability. I'm a bit hoarse right now, and I'm prone to coughing from time to time. But we're going to have someone that's going to help us with our stress. Let me introduce to you Miss CARLEE Myers. She is a stress, grief, loss coach. She actually helps individuals to de-stress. In fact, her company is called Stressless, and she is an amazing young woman that will help us to understand the different types of stress that we're dealing with, the different reasons why people process the stress that they go through, and how to do it better. Let's give a warm welcome to CARLEE Myers. CARLEE Myers, welcome to Crush Your Wellness.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Okay, you're an amazing young lady. I want to know a little bit about your journey, because oftentimes in the space of health coaching and space of life coaching, we come from our own experience that brings us to this field where we help others. So tell us a little bit about stress. What did it look like for you?
Yeah, so I always say this is sort of a can of worms that I want to give the trigger warning. I'm going to share a personal story of trauma. But, I ended up getting into this line of work because of an experience that I had as a child. When I was about 12 years old, a man was actually murdered in my home, and my mom was shot 3 times. And while my mom ended up basically making a full recovery, which was an absolute miracle, I ended up struggling for a long time. I struggled with the symptoms of PTSD, with stress, with night terrors, jumpiness, anxiety. I mean, you name it, I was probably struggling with it. And for a long time, I'll share that, I didn't really open up with anybody. I kind of carried it myself. I didn't want to be a burden. And I know so many people can resonate with that kind of sentiment. But when I finally did open up, and I kind of shared, hey, I'm kind of feeling stressed, or I'm struggling a bit right now, having a hard time. And I would ask people for advice. It was sort of like clockwork that I got the same, 5 or so responses every time. Hey, CARLEE, have you tried therapy? Have you tried yoga? Have you tried meditation? Have you tried changing your diet or hitting the gym? And these things are incredibly powerful tools. And I was also finding that I needed something more. These things were to completely change my life. And yes, and at the same time, I knew that I needed something more. And so I got sort of frustrated. And but luckily, I wasn't really willing to accept this sort of low-grade misery as my new normal. And so I kept exploring. I kept trying to figure out, okay, what is going to get me to that beautiful state of mind, that contentment, that joyfulness, that full aliveness that I knew was possible. And it took me some time, 15 plus years, to try to figure out what really worked. And when I did, it was sort of complicated. On one hand, I was so relieved, and on the other hand, I was incredibly angry. I was angry that no one is talking about the fact that there's no one size fits all when it comes to finding that beautiful state of mind. And so I threw a bit of a temper tantrum. I'm not going to lie, full transparency. And when I was done throwing that temper tantrum, it sort of hit me like a ton of bricks, or you smacked me upside the head in some sense, when I realized, oh, hey, I'm supposed to be the one that's talking about this. This is something I'm passionate about. This is something that's given me so much purpose. And so I created the Stress Less company and the Stress Less method to help people navigate finding that beautiful state of mind without having to, throw 15, 20, 30 years down the drain in some sense. So that's my story.
Well, that's an amazing story. And, one of the things that happens on this show many times is we somehow create our own stress with forgetting to turn off our background music, which we did finally. But I've got to ask you some questions because you had me thinking about a few things. You say this experience happened when you were about 12?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, so at that time, at that point, even though the brain is still forming, the years of actual intense record keeping or information storing happens between 0 to 7 years of age. So we're talking about 5 years later at the age of 12 now, but your brain and your identity is still forming. So my question would be, what words, what thoughts were running through your heads about your identity at that point when you found that you were experiencing these things, and how were people reacting to you? What was going through your head at that point?
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. So, there's certainly a piece of me that shut out a lot of the actual events of the evening, let's say. But what was standing out to me during that time as a 12-year-old girl in middle school, 7th grade, some of the things that formed in terms of my identity and the way that I started to see the world is I started to see the world as, which makes sense, as much more unsafe, but not necessarily from a physical standpoint, which you would assume if you've had someone break into your home and attack your family, but even more so from an emotional standpoint. So for me, my viewpoint of the world shifted very overnight, very dramatically when I had my first day back in the school system, where there were people whispering, right? My peers were whispering, did you hear about what happened to CARLEE's mom? Or do you think that was true? Or what's going on, right? There was a lot of hush hush whispering. And then you had the kids who were, God love them, much more direct. And they were like, hey, what happened to your mom? And then the other kids who just kind of avoid you. And there's so as a 12-year-old girl, one of the biggest experiences of that whole scenario was the social stress of reintegrating with the world. The world doesn't stop, life doesn't stop. And really quickly learning who were my real friends, who weren't, who just wanted the tea, if you will, or the gossip or the information, or who were a bit more standoffish, nervous, scared, didn't want to engage. So I learned really quickly to think, just to kind of answer your question, that was something that really showed up in terms of the way that I formed and impacted the way that I formed my identity and the way that I related with the world. Is this person safe or not from an emotional standpoint from that point moving forward?
Yeah. So
hope that answers your question.
No, that's very helpful because it helps us to understand what young ones would be going through, and
Mm-hmm.
the challenge that young ones forget is that many times us older people, especially if we're bald like me or gray like me, they have actually been through much in terms of emotional experience, not necessarily cultural experience. Okay, we didn't have cell phones back in my day, right? But we did have, the interactions between teenagers and schoolmates,
Mm-hmm.
classmates, and all sorts of things. That never changes. But the fact of the matter is that young ones don't understand, and oftentimes older ones forget what it was like to experience that. And so it's important that we realize what our young ones are going through. It's also important to realize that that stress can be anything that we deal with, and not all stress is bad. So could you please help us to understand what are the signs of good stress? What's the difference between good stress and bad stress? And what are the signs of or the symptoms of distress?
Yes. So yeah, there's distress, which is quote unquote bad stress, and then there's eustress, which is sort of like euphoric. You needing euphoric eustress, which is the good stress. Usually, when we say the word euphoric stress or eustress, what we're referring to are the things that are they're stressful, but they're good. We view them as good. So things like getting married or having a baby or graduating or gosh, there's so many examples, but planning a birthday party, even like just things like that, they can be really stressful, but we view them as good. And when we do that, what happens is that our blood vessels actually expand, so we don't have a lot of these crazy symptoms that we have with distress, where our blood vessels actually contract. We're creating hypertension in the body, and then we've got all of these symptoms of distress, like headaches, insomnia. We got reproductive issues. We've got cardiovascular issues like heart attacks, strokes. Distress can also cause issues with digestion. I mean, it's literally distress impacts every single part of our body. It can affect sperm count. It can affect menopause symptoms. It can affect painfulness of a woman's period. I mean, literally every aspect, if we aren't careful in properly managing our experience of distress and our perspective of stress, we can go down a pretty scary rabbit hole pretty quickly.
That's so very true. In dealing with some of my clients, I help them to understand that the reason why they are in the state that they're in, the glucose is high. In the United States now, they're saying that the birth rate has shrunk significantly, and that's due to a number of issues, including the issues with reproductive system, whether sperm count or egg production, all these things. We're in a highly stressful situation. But when the body perceives and when the mind perceives that there is stress, what it really is doing is saying, okay, we are not safe and we have to protect ourselves. And they're gearing themselves up. But now, isn't it true that stress is actually a continued heightened state of hyper alertness that the body might be undergoing, but not necessarily we don't necessarily consciously know that, or we're not consciously aware of that?
In many cases, I mean, we have to, in many cases, our body goes into survival mode and we can't connect, because that's part of surviving. If we actually were able to connect with the level of stress that we were dealing with, then we may crush under the stress, right? So there is that sort of body signaling the shutdown of the connection between the information and what we're actually experiencing. In other cases, we can feel like we're carrying the weight of the world, but it depends on the person. It depends on the circumstances. It depends on how intense. I know for me, working with clients with a history of loss or trauma, like a simple example might be someone in a long-term unhealthy relationship. When they're in that long-term unhealthy relationship, oftentimes they can't see how unhealthy or toxic, in air quotes, toxic or stressful that relationship is, because they're just surviving. They're just trying to make it through day to day. And then once we get out of that stressful situation, we can look back and we can say, whoa, I was like a lobster in boiling, where the water was slowly turned up to boiling, right? We didn't realize until it was, so intense that we had to do something about it. It could be, examples like that. where it gradually happens over time, but also we're just in a situation where we have to survive. And if we were to face every tiny little stressor, it could be unbearable. So it just depends on the circumstance, I think.
Well, what are the signs of stress that a person could possibly experience and not understand that that's what they're going through? Or maybe they're beginning to figure it out. They're experiencing some things and they finally say, well, wait a minute, there's something there, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, we could look for the emotional signs, right? We could look for a sense, it depends on the person again, but we could look for, okay, do we feel emotionally numb? There's that component where we just feel like we're kind of moving through life on autopilot. Do we feel a sense of despondency or despair or anxiety, right? Those are key indicators that we've got some stress in our life. So there's the emotional indicators. There's also the physical indicators, right? Do we have unexplained health concerns that the doctors keep saying, you know, hey, everything seems okay, or I don't know why this keeps happening, right? That could be a sign that's saying, hey, we've got some stress we're dealing with. That achy knee where you get an x-ray and nothing's coming back. That could be the inflammation caused by stress. So you could start to make some connections to more negative emotions, saying, okay, if I'm experiencing more negative emotions, I'm likely experiencing stress, but also are there aches and pains that I'm dealing with? Do I have tight shoulders, a tight back, aches and pains here and there? The other indicator is just looking to see, is there a lack of full aliveness within yourself? Right? Sometimes it's easier to look at the lack of something versus what is actually happening, especially if we're in survival mode. So asking ourselves, do I feel fully alive? Do I feel playful? Do I feel joyful? Do I feel content? Do I feel any of these things? And it's not consistently. We're not looking for these things consistently necessarily, but if we don't have those things, that might also be an indicator that there's some level of stress we're experiencing in our life that maybe we haven't looked at for whatever reason. Maybe it's survival, maybe it's avoidance. It depends on the situation.
So let's move a little bit into the loss and grief aspect of that, because stress can manifest itself as and in terms of the grief that one is experiencing or the loss. And what is the subtle difference between loss and grief anyway? Could you help us with that?
Mm-hmm. I think loss relates to the event, the thing that happened or the things that are happening. So loss can reference, you know, the obvious like death, but it could also reference the shift in a relationship, the loss of a relationship as it once was. It could be a personal injury. It could be so many things. It's loss to me is about the event or the events that are happening that are creating change in our lives. Whereas grief is a complicated emotion. I don't even know if I'd call it an emotion. It's a complicated thing, which involves conflicting emotions, right? So grief, what makes grief so interesting and also so complicated is that grief involves these conflicting emotions. So let me give you an example. Let's say someone in your life has been suffering with a terminal illness, let's say, and then they finally pass away. We can have two conflicting emotions when that happens. On one side of the spectrum, we may have relief, right? Which is a positive emotion. I'm so glad that they passed because now they're no longer suffering. And that's a really good thing. But at the same time, we may have this deep sadness, the realization that I can never touch this person again. I can never talk to this person again. Right. And so we have this positive emotion and this, you know, negative one. And there's this like push and pull that can happen between them. And then you throw in a little bit of guilt and woof, right? It can make things really complicated. So that's how I would kind of differentiate grief versus loss. Grief is about the complicated emotional experience, versus loss is about sort of the event itself, in my head at least.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that come to mind. First, one experience with a client that I was helping through grief, and she was a baker. And what happened with her, one day she was actually kneading some dough, and she As she's working with the dough, she tosses it and she catches it. And when she catches it, she begins to melt down. She starts to cry profusely. And the reason why is because she had a child and the child died. And when she held that child, she held that way, and the dough happened to land just in the same way. She caught it just in the same way she would carry that child. And it just triggered everything. The other thing that came up for me was my personal experience. Some years ago, over a decade or so, it was interesting because it was a very stressful time in my own life. And it was a point where I was undergoing a major change in my life. I was kind of losing out on some responsibilities that I had held dear. And I remember that morning, I jumped into the shower and I was getting a shower, but everything was running through my head. And something popped in my head that said, you know, at this time in my life, if my mom was alive, I would rest my head on her lap and just bawl, and she'd be there to comfort me. And all of a sudden, it just came pouring out of me, and I went down, and I was a mess until I could get myself together. But that was the grief release.
Yep.
Because in that case, I had done everything. I took care of her for 4 years. I presided over her funeral, gave the funeral talk. Was there to comfort others and helping others and moving through that space. I won't say I never took time to grieve. In my mind, just seeing her go in the direction that she went, I grieved enough. At least so I thought. Until that.
Yeah. So we think. Yeah. Yeah. We know what's really wonderful about those moments, those like breakdown, the tears flow, like, is that we're actually healing the body. Like, we oftentimes think this is all in the mind, but when just like the act of crying releases hormones, it releases endorphins. And so it's actually a really, really positive, good thing for your physiological body to cry, to have that release. And so I know so many of us have been, told things like, oh, don't cry or I'll give you something to cry about. Or we've sort of been trained to not actually go through the act of crying. And it's actually one of the most healing things that we can do. So from that perspective, that's on many perspectives, on many levels, that's a really powerful story.
Yeah. There's an old saying.
Just want to share that.
There's an old saying, the shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. And if that's the case, then real men do cry, right? Let me ask you this question. There are other things that we deal with that we have to work through. But I was always curious, can someone kind of develop a sort of Stockholm syndrome when it comes to the stress that they're under? Whereby,
can you repeat that for me?
Is it possible that someone could undergo a sort of Stockholm syndrome when they're undergoing a lot of stress? That they're kind of now connected to their stress. It's hard for them to go without it.
Oh yeah, stress can be it can be sometimes addictive, because here's the thing, especially for those of us who've experienced trauma or like I will say, like, trauma that's ongoing, those little things that like pile up, that becomes our normal. We come to expect it. It's the routine, it's predictable. And even though it's not safe, we view it as safe because it's predictable. And so that's where we can become addicted to stress, whether it's like, some crazy toxic situation that we just keep putting ourselves in, or it's like the little things like, let's say, taking on more work than we could possibly handle, right? Because the predictability, the brain values the predictability.
Mm.
And in some ways we view that as safe, even when it's actually not. And so it's a challenge, especially if we grew up in kind of volatile environments as adults. Now it will likely be a challenge to choose peace, because peace, I don't know who needs to hear this, but peace often can feel like boredom.
Mm.
And part of, part of the work that I do is, okay, let's get out of the stress. Let's let go of the stress. Okay, now we might be a little bit bored. Now, what's the next level? The next level is full aliveness. The next level is play. The next level is, all of these beautiful states of mind. But we first have to be able to thank our past, thank our coping mechanisms, and let them go. But yeah, oftentimes, if we're addicted to that stressful experience, that when we keep inviting it back into our lives, when we finally let go of it, peace can feel a lot like boredom. But yeah, that next piece is the joyful aliveness, the playfulness. And that's my favorite part of the journey, of course.
Yeah, of course. So that's very interesting, because that piece, what they have to realize that, and I would encourage them to substitute the word peace for the word transition, because oftentimes there's a lull when you're moving into your next phase. You see, so rather than be bored with the peace, start getting excited in the transition for what's to come, because that's where the play, that's where the fun is, that's where the joy is.
Yeah.
Really.
Yeah. And what's really kind of wonderful, and this is sort of ties back into distress versus eustress. With distress, there's still a level of like unpredictability, like we're out of control and it's really scary. But that's how it is with play as well. It's unpredictable. It's like, oh my gosh, what's going to come next, right? And it keeps you on the edge of your seat. And it can take a lot of training, but one of the wonderful things about this work is that if we can shift our perspective, we can easily shift from distress to eustress by saying, ooh, what's coming next, right? And taking that approach of more playfulness to our lives. Like, life's going to always throw us stuff. There's going to be stressful things. There's going to be bad things that happen. There's going to be wonderful things that happen. But, if we can take that shift, we're going to experience a lot more full aliveness and fun and playfulness. And ease, honestly, along the way, instead of resisting it all the time.
Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. So, CARLEE, tell us this. In your practice, where can we find you? Now, I have clients that at some point we realize that they're not going to lose weight until they confront that. And I refer them to you. But now, where can others find you if they're not working directly with me?
Yeah. Well, so you can find me pretty much everywhere on social media at the Stress Less Co. And then you can find me on my website at stresslessco.com. Got some pretty cool stuff there. So those are the best places you can find me at the moment.
Cool. Well, listen, or you can always come to me and say, I need help, and I can show you, I can introduce you to CARLEE. But now,
exactly.
That's it. Do you have any, you say you got a lot of fun stuff there. Maybe there are a couple of things that you can leave in the link below for some of my regulars who I know are tuning into the show.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got my Holding Space beta program coming up, so I'll drop a link for that. It's a really powerful program where we can feel deeply seen and heard in our experiences. And then the other thing that I'll drop for you guys is a free audio training. It's a free meditation and audio training on why managing your energy is so, so important. It's all about that perspective shift that we were talking about. So I'll drop the link to that free training too.
Beautiful, beautiful. So, that said, I'm grateful to have you with us. And, stress is a killer. Okay. People are dealing with stress so much. It comes in the form of depression. Depression has its own form of stress, where you have a sense of hopelessness. If that is you, there's the stress, there's the suicide number that you can call. But nowadays, you also have a number that you can text, which is 988. Please, if you're having trouble like that and you need to talk to someone and it's imminent, text 988. Someone will get you as soon as faster than you can blink, because life is precious, you see. So that said, we want to find ways of de-stressing. And one of the things I really want everyone to be aware of is towards the end of the month, on May 27th at 7:30 a.m., in order to catch those beautiful blue rays of the sun, we're going to have our Shinrin Yoku, the forest bathing event, live at at Umstead Park. That's William B. Umstead Park in Raleigh, North Carolina. So at that point, what we'll be doing, of course, we'll explain a little bit about what Shinrin Yoku is, why it is important, how it helps you, why dealing with stress is so important. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the other things. Because we're going to experience some breathing techniques that's going to get us not just centered, but help us to become aware of both our bodies and our environments in order to experience the forest bathing. We'll do our little walking meditation. And so if you're going to come to this, you want to make sure that you're not wearing rubber shoes, leather, okay? Maybe some sort of woven basket weave sort of thing, not plastic. We want things that are going to connect you with the earth, because we're going to get to the clearing. We're going to do some grounding, which means we're going to take our shoes off, especially if they're rubber, and we're going to get ourselves connected with the earth. We're going to feel the energies through our bodies, the subtle energies that actually promote healing. And we're going to experience that as well. After which, we're going to round things out with a gratitude practice also, because all of those things, some of the things that our grandparents told us to do, like you better count your blessings, go outside and play, go get some fresh air, all those things actually have a benefit to your body, to de-stressing your body, to connecting with you. So, and I'll be having a promo with some testimonials in terms of the Shinrin Yoku that has been done in the past. And so we really look forward to encouraging all of you to be there for that. But I've got one last question I've got to ask CARLEE. And this is one I ask all my guests. And I'm so grateful that you are here with us today to help us to de-stress and get ourselves back on track, to see what things we need to do. So that said, CARLEE Myers, what does it mean to you to crush your mountain?
For me, it means contentment. It means playfulness. It means joyful aliveness. And it means being seen for me, the great I am, right? Like someone seeing my soul and being able to see someone else's soul. Not what I did, not what they did, not what we've accomplished, but actually connecting on a deep, deep level. So that is the way that I crush my mountain.
I see you. We're going to get all Avatar on us now, you know. You know. But it's interesting.
I love it.
in Hindi, the greeting is Namaste, which says, I recognize the divinity within you, highlighting the fact that we all are reflections. As imperfect as we are, we imperfectly reflect the divine, but we have that spark. And we recognize that in one another. And if we do that, we can help each other to navigate this crazy world, to de-stress. And so I want to encourage everyone, if this information is helpful to you, if you found it encouraging, please give us a like, give us a subscription, subscribe, if you're going to see us on YouTube. And above all, leave a comment, share it with someone that may need it, and join us for the Shinrin Yoku Forest Bathing event. And we'll see you next time. But until then, don't climb your mountain, crush through it. Thank you so very much, CARLEE.
Thank you so much for having me. That event sounds amazing.